Hey guys, Bound to Divide here with Ableton Tips, and today I'm going to be taking you through this remake of Do It To It. It's a really big song, I'm sure you know all about it, and there's some really interesting stuff we can learn from it to do with groove and processing samples, so yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so I'm just going to play the loop that we're working with. Okay, and I'm just going to play completely without any vocal samples here. Okay, so there's very little in terms of synth work in this. There's only really one instrument that I used, and that's this violin. And so I'm not super happy with the violin that comes with Ableton. So I did kind of two versions of this little violin thing. First one is in Kontakt, and it sounds like this. Versus these violins that I found in Ableton's stock library. It sounds like this. So it's not super convincing, but if you don't have a professional sounding library, then you can grab these violin strings. When you initially load them up, there's only a couple of things you need to do to get this sounding the way it does sound. So let me just quickly show you how this violin looks when we first load it up. Violin strings. So here you can see the differences in the force and the friction. So if you just up this force, initially this violin sounds like this. So we can just turn that up to 40% here and up the friction a bit. And then we get a bit closer to a more realistic sounding violin. So in terms of the processing on the violin, all we've got is this auto filter, reverb, and a delay. And the delay is set to 4 and 3 here. And the dry wet's at 34%, feedback at 50%. And then we have this reverb here, it's at 43%, and we've rolled off a bit of the high end from it. And together with this auto filter, which is brought down to 4.8 kilohertz, just to make it a bit darker. That's pretty much how you set up the violin. Okay, and then in terms of the MIDI here, we've got, these are the notes, so if you want to copy this down and follow along, this is how you sequence out the violin. So we could start off with these 3 notes, that's the little bit in them, and then it's just moving between this B and the D. Din, din, din. And then we're shifting up basically a semitone. So if you take these and have to move them up 1, then that's when you get this pattern. And where this actually comes from, this melody, is from the vocal. So the vocal, if you want to get this vocal, I actually found it on YouTube, on the Universal YouTube channel. So they had uploaded it there. So maybe that's where this Do It To It cover or remix actually probably came from. I'm just guessing because the acapella is pretty easily accessible. So it's there on YouTube and you can pretty much just rip it off in whichever way you choose. But the original vocal has this section in it. And if I just take this and this off. So you can find this in the original acapella. It's, where is it? I think it's right at the beginning. So it's the very first 2 vocal samples in the acapella. And what you'll notice is that it's kind of a form and shifted down. And you can see here I was testing out a bunch of different form and shifters, and I couldn't find anything that sounded right until I found this plugin. So I know this is a third-party plugin, and this is an Ableton channel where we only use Ableton plugins, but there was just no way around getting that formant to shift down using Ableton plugins. So this is the plugin I used. This is called The Source, and then I just shifted the formant down -3.2. And turn on this auto filter. So I was talking about how this section and this section is shifted a semitone apart, and that would have come about because if you pitch this acapella up 1 semitone, that's when you get this melody. And then it's got this little sample under it too. So I go And you can find that also in this part of the acapella if you want to go and do it again yourself. And the rest of the vocals also processed in the same way as these. So we've just got the source, pitch shifting it down, and then I've got this crazy EQ to kind of brighten it up, because without that you get this. It's super dark without this EQ. Okay, so that covers the vocal and the violin. Let's get into probably what you're all here for, and that is the beat, because that's what really like sets this track off. The beat combined with this a cappella that's like landing on the quarter notes. It's a super strong groove, and a lot of the groove is coming from the kick and the tom and this groove kick. So I'm not 100% sure if this is how it was made in the original, but I think it sounds pretty close to the original. So you can get there using these techniques. So let's just start with this groove and talk through it. Okay, so we've got a kick, a tom, and a groove kick. There's no bass line, or at least coming from a synth. The bass line is coming from this 808 tom that's been distorted, but we'll get back to that. Let's start off with the kick. So the kick drum is made up of two samples here, so let me just drag this to the left. These come from the D Premium Volume 5 sample pack, and I basically found two samples that sounded pretty close to the original kick, but only parts of them sounded right. So I've spliced them together and we've got pretty much kick that sounds pretty close to the original. So you'll hear this sample. It's got a nice transient on it. And this one has that like nice, almost like distorted subby tail on it, but the transient wasn't very bright. So that's what I wanted, that really nice tail and that nice transient. So you can take this hard kick and combine it with this kick. So what you'll need to do is basically move the transient out of here, so we only get this nice subby tail. And then what we want to do is really try and line up the phase of this kick so that it's more natural when this fades into the other one. If I crossfade them like this and the phase is kind of off, you'll see that this movement in the waveform won't be as smooth. So if I shift this maybe like to there, then we start getting this weird shape, and you want to try and avoid that because it's just going to sound strange, especially on a gigantic sound system, you know, and this is a proper club banger or festival banger even. And on a festival system, you really don't want these gigantic subs playing this weird phasey section of the kick, because people will probably feel it and it'll feel strange. So yeah, you just need to line up this transient nicely. Try and get, sorry, not the transient, line up the phase nicely here, and you can just keep shifting this until it looks like there's a section where it'll line up nicely, like let's say over there, that looks lined up, and then with the crossfade, and you're getting a nice kick drum. Okay, so that's our kick drum, and there's nothing fancy happening with the kick in terms of sequencing. It's just landing on all these quarter notes. Then I've got this groove kick, which is kick 05 from D Premium 1, and I think I took out the transient. Let's quickly grab that sample. So yeah, if we compare these two kicks, I'll just bring them down to a similar volume. So yeah, you can hear that that one's a lot shorter and it doesn't have much of a click in it. So all I did was basically take out the transient and fade it in a bit like that. And you'll see that it's not landing on this grid line, this 16th. It's actually swung forward. So if you hold Alt and drag this forward, then you can kind of swing it. And I know it's a really common thing for people to use the groove pool in Ableton to apply their swing, but I think, to me, when I was studying this beat, it looks like the swing is kind of inconsistent. So some of them are more swung than others. And so my guess is that it was done manually like this, by just dragging stuff off the grid. And then shortening this kick drum and giving it a little bit of a fade. Then you get this. I think, did I pitch it up? No, I'm not sure. I don't think I did. Oh, I think I might have pitched it up a bit. Yeah, it looks like it was pitched up because the waveform is cycles are a bit closer together. So you can just experiment with that. But the most important thing is that we're just getting this nice short, like ghost kick that's providing this nice swing with the kick. And it's really common for people to just use the kick that they were working with and just drag that down and maybe low pass it a bit, turn it down a bit in volume. Another thing you could do is maybe use a tom sample. It doesn't have to be this specific sample. It's just how I got there in the end. So yeah, that's how it gets sequenced. It's landing after the first kick on the last 16th, and it is a little bit swung. And then on this final bar here, as we kind of reach the end, we have an extra one landing on the last kick instead of on the first kick of the bar. And that one's there's no swing at all, it's just landing on the 16th here.
Just a quick break before we go back to the tutorial. If you find these type of videos helpful, we can highly recommend the PML Academy with over 35 full-length online courses, spreading over topics like writing chords and melodies or arranging your songs to producing entire songs from start to finish. So check out the link in the description to see what's inside the All Courses bundle exactly.
Okay, so that's the groove kick, and then we get to the bass line. And I saw like lots of people are using, who have remade this before, are using Serum or some synth to make this bass line. And to me, or to my ear at least, it sounded like an 808 tom. So I just went straight for that. I didn't even try it in any synth. So if you take an 808 tom and you put overdrive on it, then you get this really nice bass sound that has this like nice movement in pitch. And that's because the tom naturally like decays in pitch, so you get this really nice like bounce and groove with it. And I've actually seen Chris Lake in a live stream do this exact technique, so that's why I thought of it. So let me show you how to do that. You're going to want to just grab an 808 tom, and Ableton comes with these samples. 808 tom, and where is it? Chose this one. So if you just make a new channel here, you drag this into a simpler. Okay, and then I tuned the tom, so you'll see here it's transposed to +4 semitones and +47 cents, and that's just because the tom originally, when you load it into the simpler, is tuned to G, if I remember correctly. So you can see here, if we hover our mouse over this peak, and if you want to get your spectrum to look like this, because when you initially load it in, it's going to look like this, you can play with the range. So turn off auto and then set this to -13 and -23, and then you get a nice sharp peak to look at. You can also bring down this refresh rate, bring it up, and then you'll be able to get a better visual on this peak. So yeah, it's hitting G, so I just tuned that up to C, and I think it was not perfectly like on G, so that's why it's 4 + 47 or whatever I did over there. And then we have the sample hitting in C. Okay, so once we've done that, then we can go and sequence out the MIDI for it. So the MIDI here, you'll see is playing this C sharp, and then it's going up to E. And you can see I'm playing with like different note lengths just to give it some variation. And I guess when you listen to it, it almost sounds like the beat is doing this. And that might be the case, but I just felt like it sounded nicer to just have the note run over into the next bar. Over into the next kick. And it still sounded the same as the original bass line to me. And then we've got this overdrive. So this is how it sounds without overdrive. Turn on the overdrive. Drive is set to 57% and tone is at 23. And then you can just copy these settings here for the filter. And that's because we just kind of like, when I set up overdrive, I just move this around until it sounds nice. So down here sound good to me because we're kind of distorting the fundamental and getting this nice gritty tom. And then you can also just bring down the dry wet. I think originally it's at 50%. So I think that was just a bit much, so I brought it down. And then I'm just sidechaining it to the kick. Turn on sidechain here, sidechain to the kick. And then I set up this EQ so that we are only really looking at the mid and high end of the kick, and we're getting this nice curve to sidechain to. The release is at 63, so it's quite a long sidechain. We're really trying to like just make space for the kick to punch through nicely. Right, and then the hat. So the hat to me sounded like a 909 kind of hat. So I found this one, this DPV5 open hat, that sounded pretty close actually to the original. I've just given it a bit of a fade to shorten it a bit, and big part of getting this to sound right was to use the saturator. So you'll hear without the processing, that's how it sounds, and with the saturator on, it kind of like almost kills the dynamic of the hat and also softens the harshness of it. And this is like a great tip when trying to like take harshness out of sounds, like hi-hats specifically. This works really well, and even sometimes like synths. If you want to take out that like really harsh brittleness, if you saturate them, it tends to kind of reduce these resonant peaks. At the same time, it adds harmonics, so it smooths things out and like flattens them. So using saturators on hats is something that I do quite often, and even sometimes on my entire drum bus or my hat bus, I'll just saturate everything quite a lot, and then you get like the smooth top end. So there's nothing fancy about how this was sequenced, it's just playing on the offbeat. And then we've also got this hat here, which is an 808 open hat from the D Premium version 1, D Premium Volume 1. And that's a very classic sound. I'm sure everybody's heard this kind of a hat before. There was no processing done to this. All I did was just cut it short. So it's nice and tight and on the beat like this. And it's panned right. And this hat serves quite a strong purpose in the groove. Let's just play the beat with and without this hat. So I'm going to turn it off. And then when it's on, we get this nice bounce here. So yeah, it's quite important. And then in terms of hats, we've also got this 16th hat over here, and that one's panned left. And it's just doing this little kind of bouncy thing here. And you'll see in the MIDI here, I've adjusted the velocities and also added in that swing. Okay, so how I adjusted the swing was basically I just looked at the original track. I had it here for reference. I don't actually have it in the project anymore. And I just zoomed in on the track's waveform and just had a look where that hi-hat was sitting. But again, if you're building a brand new idea, I guess the way to deal with the swing would be to just manually shift it forward until it feels nice on the beat. Okay, so you've got these really light hats, and the sample that we used is this DPV5 closed 7 hat, and I haven't done really any processing to it. Oh, I rolled off a tiny bit of the harsh high end here, which makes a little bit of a difference. You can hear it, just pay attention. It gets a tiny bit darker, and there's no other processing, no other EQ. I haven't changed the length of it or anything. So all I did was just pan it left, and then it's pretty quiet in the beat. But if I turn it off, you kind of feel like you're missing something. Okay, so yeah, that's you got the MIDI, and it's a pretty easy one to set up. Okay, and then the clap. So the clap here is made up of 2 samples. We've got this DPV5 one, and this is how it sounds without any processing. It was a bit long, so I just shortened it. I don't think I changed the pitch or anything. Nope, didn't change the pitch. So I just EQ'd the sample a bit to bring out this 1K around here, to give it like this certain character. If I boost it, we hear the character I'm talking about. So I want that sound to come out more, so I boosted that, and then just rolled off some of the high end, and then saturated it quite a lot. And that's just again to like smooth out the transient and just really like crush it. And we've got a second layer here, which is this clap. And I wanted this one because it has like that fundamental like snare tone in it that's quite low down and gives the clap some snap and some punch. Yeah, you can hear it really adds like weight to the clap. So with these kind of claps, you're probably usually going to be going for drum sounds like 808, 909 kind of sounding claps like these ones, and then making them really short and tight and overdriving or saturating them to basically make them smooth and like really crushed and loud in the mix, because they really need to like land on that kick and punch hard. And then you can see here I added even more saturation overall, so without it, it jumps out even more and just flattens it. And you'll also find that in saturating things like this, you'll get more headroom in your mix, so you can push it even louder. Without the saturator, you'll often see like this big build-up in frequencies, and your limiter on the first beat will be fine, but on the second beat, when the clap hits with the kick, you got this huge spike in amplitude, and then your limiter has to work twice as hard, and you can't get the track as loud as you want. So saturating can really clean up that headroom, because it basically squashes these transients down. So yeah, that's pretty much all of the beat. Pretty simple, but really groovy and effective. I think I learned quite a lot in remaking this, and I really enjoyed it. Hope you learned something too, and thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next tutorial.
With it, drop with it, lean with it, rock with it, snap with it. All my ladies, pop your backs with it. With it, drop with it, lean with it, rock with it, snap with it. All my ladies.